Live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Tim Stenivek. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto. It's a look at the people, transactions, and technology shaping the world of decentralized finance.
And coming up, Bitcoin goes from risk asset to safe haven over the course of a single month, now sitting above $90,000 a coin.
And leveraged ETFs have been thrown around amid all the market volatility. We're going to talk to a CEO behind a new fund connected to XRP. That ETF is surging.
And speaking of ETFs, around 70 crypto-related funds are sitting with the SEC, awaiting approval as Paul Atkins is sworn in as the agency's new chair.
All that coming up over the next half hour right here on Bloomberg Crypto. First, though, a check at how Bitcoin is doing just over the last couple of days, up about 7% just in the last 2 days. It seems to be turning in perhaps to a haven asset for investors who are looking for a little bit of cover from this global trade war. Let's zoom out, though, and see what the month of April actually looks like. Look at this, up close to 7% over the last month. It's kind of fueling some optimism that Bitcoin is finally breaking free of its longstanding tendency to move in tandem with U.S. tech stocks. Is it digital gold, as Bloomberg Intelligence's Mike McGlone likes to say? That's the big question. But if you go back to the beginning of the month, look at that down there, that slump that we saw in the day after Trump's so-called Liberation Day, when those tariffs were put on many countries around the world. You actually see Bitcoin fall, and then since then, it's pretty much been on a steady rise higher, Katie. A real difference in what we've seen with other risk assets.
Yeah, absolutely. Breaking away from tech stocks at a pretty good time, trading more like gold, just in time for gold to rocket higher. You can see that physical Bitcoin, gold, is up about 9% over the past month in April alone. That has dragged Bitcoin higher, especially in the last couple days. The crypto is up about 6% or so. And take a look at what has happened to tech stocks. In blue, you have the NASDAQ 100 actually lower by 6.5% or so. So Bitcoin may be taking on some safe haven characteristics, at least when it comes to its relationship with gold, Tim.
Physical Bitcoin is what Katie called it. Let's discuss this decoupling between Bitcoin and tech equities. Bloomberg Crypto team leader Michael Regan joins us here on set. It's the moment that everybody's kind of been waiting for. For so long, this has moved in tandem with risk assets. Why the divergence now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Tim. I mean, I think throughout Bitcoin's creation, since its creation, I think people have really tried to pigeonhole it into an analogous traditional asset. Is it gold? Is it tech stocks?
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's an unsatisfying exercise.
Is it just Bitcoin?
I think it's just Bitcoin. And I think, these correlations come and they go and they're unreliable. You're right, for a long time, it was very correlated to the NASDAQ 100 and the Mag 7 tech stocks. I think it's a very specific set of circumstances that have it now being viewed as sort of a haven asset. Specifically, that limited supply of Bitcoin. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. There's already about 20 million in circulation. And you can contrast that to sort of the unpredictable monetary policy that we're faced with now, with President Trump, basically demanding that the Fed chair be replaced or resign, trying to pressure for lower rates. So that sets up a very specific moment now. The dollar weakness, and a lot of professional traders and investors are saying now it's really fulfilling sort of that destiny of being, limited supply, finite supply,
right,
predictable supply, versus a very unpredictable future for U.S. monetary policy.
Well, it's interesting. It feels like it goes along with the sell America trade. Basically, you have people selling dollars. They're reaching for gold. They're reaching for Bitcoin. It all kind of ties together. But I'm curious about how the regulatory piece wraps in, because as we mentioned, now you have Paul Atkins finally getting set up, finally getting his desk over at the SEC. And there's a lot of optimism for what that might unleash when it comes to the product set.
Yeah, and certainly, and that was a big part of the rally we saw after the election up through Inauguration Day. I would say maybe not so much regulation right now. We kind of know where that's all going, but policy from the White House is very important. Remember, President Trump issued an executive order to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Right now, his team, his crypto team, is studying how to accomplish that and how to possibly buy more Bitcoin to add to that. They don't want it to be taxpayer money used to fund that. But there are other assets. There's talk about monetizing some of the Fed's gold and using it to buy Bitcoin. There's other notions being thrown around about how they can do it a budget neutral way to buy Bitcoin. So I think it's really, that is sort of the unsung, I think, catalyst that's also part of this huge rally right now, in addition to sort of that macro element of limited supply and dollar weakness, sort of rekindling that original notion of Bitcoin as a hedge against uncertain monetary policy.
All right, Mike Regan, it's great to see you. That is Mike Regan. He leads crypto coverage for our Bloomberg News team. So let's talk a little bit more about the product set and talk specifically about leveraged crypto ETFs, because the Teucrium 2x long daily XRP ETF, it's been on a tear since its launch earlier this month. It reached $25 million in AUM in just 9 trading days. And I'm pleased to say that Sal Gilbertie, he is the CEO of Teucrium. He joins us now. Great to see you in person, Sal.
Good to see you as well, Katie.
So a leveraged 2x long XRP ETF. You launched it at a good time because we're seeing this bounce back in the cryptocurrency itself. But who is this for? Who is coming into this ETF in its first 9 or so trading days?
Well, I think the XRP community, they really are a bit of a cult. They are dedicated people, and rightfully so. There are a lot of XRP wallets, I think more than 6 million out there. So we know there's pent-up demand to tap into XRP in a more traditional Wall Street wrapper. Now, it's not so traditional that you go with leverage, that's the point. But this specific product is geared towards traders who have a short-term view, to primarily one-day view of what XRP's price moves might be. This allows them in a traditional brokerage account to achieve leverage without a margin account.
Are you seeing those folks actually adopt it right now?
As an ETF issuer, we don't see directly who buys them, but we believe it's a mix of professionals and retails trading their own accounts.
What do you think of retail getting in on it? Is it risky?
Of course it's risky. Leveraged funds are always risky, and people need to be very careful. I think sophisticated retail traders are in this. I hope that the non-sophisticated traders do their homework first before they set their foot in this.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like volatility is the point, right? You want the action, you want the ups and downs that come with a lot of these coins. I'm curious about what working with the SEC was like, because a year ago, I think it would have been really hard to get this approved. And even though Paul Atkins only recently got confirmed, actually got in the chair, it seems like this SEC is already more permissive, more open-minded to these sorts of products.
Absolutely. The key difference is the old SEC regime was a blocker. They acted literally as a block. The leadership in the SEC worked against the crypto industry, I believe. And now we had this little gap before the new SEC commissioner was approved. And that's when we got our fund approved, just because we followed the rules. We thought the time was right. It was. We applied as soon as we could, meaning the old regime had left and wouldn't block us. And we simply listed as soon as we could, following the normal rules. The staff is really wonderful at the SEC. They're knowledgeable. They push back when they need to, and they accept our pushback. It's the leadership that matters. The old leadership was a blocker to crypto. The new leadership hopefully will not be.
What exactly do you want to see from them, though? We hear a lot about regulatory clarity, but what is the regulatory clarity that you want to see?
Well, I think they need to put regulatory clarity over Ripple, over the issuers of the coin. And Ripple's asking for that. Ripple's a company of really professional people working really hard on this. That's why we chose XRP. We believe in XRP. We're not making a price prediction, but we do believe it's a coin that will have the most utility out there. Bitcoin is a store of value. I agree with Mike McGlone, but I think that XRP has a true use case. There's just no doubt about it. And the Ripple team, from the interaction we've had with them, they're really professional. They act like investment bankers over there. They know what they're doing, and they will make this work. And we will see a different Wall Street. We will see traditional finance be merged slowly with DeFi, DeFi, yes. And then we will see DeFi take over. It'll take longer than people think. I'm convinced of it, but it will be so much more efficient. And, 3 to 5 second settlement, which is what Ripple can do, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, I want to dig in specifically on the use case that you mentioned, because a lot of folks watching probably would have the reaction. The only use case for Ripple and some of these other tokens out there is speculation. So what is the actual use case of XRP?
Okay, so XRP, that's absolutely not the case. You can speculate in it because it's out there and trading. But XRP they started Ripple, and I'm not going to speak for them, okay? But they started Ripple to facilitate transactions, moving money around, okay? But now it's literally helping tokenize everything. As they develop their level 2 build out, they are really going to tokenize everything. They've just bought a broker-dealer clearing member, as you may know, and I think that that's the first step toward integrating traditional finance with DeFi. And I'm telling you, this is going to be a breakthrough. It is a breakthrough, but it'll happen slower than people think.
Okay, so the 2x levered ETF with exposure to XRP. What's in the pipeline? What's next?
We have filed for an inverse. We'll see what investor demand is, but we'll see. I mean, we were the first to get a 33 Act Bitcoin fund approved, as you may know, and Grayscale won their lawsuit on the back of that approval. Then the new SEC came in, which is now the old SEC, thankfully, and they prevented everything. So we'll see. We only put things out on what we believe in. We believed in Bitcoin, store of value. We believe in XRP. It is a use case that is already proven. It just has to expand now.
All right. Sal, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. That's Teucrium CEO Sal Gilbertie. Hey, let's get a quick check on equities because the S&P 500 is spiking. This after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the current trade situation with China is unsustainable and he sees de-escalation happening soon. He's making these comments at a JP Morgan event in Washington. The S&P 500 right now higher by 2.6%. Katie, you dug into a little bit of the recent history with one-day moves. How's this comparing to what we saw over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, the size and scope here. I mean, when it was higher by 2.7%, that is your session high so far on the S&P 500. That is the biggest one-day jump since April 9th. April 9th was when we got that 90-day pause in a Truth Social post from President Donald Trump. So clearly this market reacting to maybe some easing, some signals of potential easing of trade tensions.
All right, we'll certainly keep you updated with anything that we hear out of that closed-door event. Coming up, though, T.Rowe Price is head of digital asset strategy on the new SEC chair, Paul Atkins.
And to access all of the latest data and news on crypto, check out CRYP Go on the terminal. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Let's take a quick check on the S&P 500. Close to session highs, higher by about 2.7%. You can see the spike after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the current trade situation with China is unsustainable and that he sees de-escalation happening soon. Now, those comments are coming from a closed-door JP Morgan event in Washington. We will bring you more comments as we have them. He did add, though, that negotiations haven't started yet, but that a deal is possible. That's enough to bring us to session highs, Tim.
I wonder what that deal looks like. I mean, 145% tariffs on goods coming from China right now.
Yeah.
A lot of folks would say that is unsustainable.
Yeah, that is the big question there. But clearly, investors taking this as a buy the rumor and maybe they'll sell the news.
Okay, well, taking a look at what's happening to crypto, specifically Bitcoin, we're seeing Bitcoin higher by 4%, Ether higher by 7.6%. Well, yesterday, Paul Atkins was sworn in as the chair of the SEC. He says he's ready to make the U.S. the best country to invest in and do business. T.Rowe Price, head of digital assets strategy, Blue Macellari, joins us now. Blue, always good to chat with you. I do want to start with what we're seeing or potentially going to see from Paul Atkins. As we heard from Mike Regan a little earlier, a lot of the excitement about him being chosen as the chair of the SEC was actually, post-election and going into inauguration. Even though we've seen an increase in Bitcoin to the tune of, 6-7% this month, we're still lower than we were on Inauguration Day. What is the opportunity for Bitcoin moving forward, given Paul Atkins as head of the SEC?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's quite encouraging is the sort of information gathering that we've seen the SEC engage in so far this year, even before Chair Atkins was sworn in. So we've seen close to 6 or 7 roundtables hosted by the SEC, public engagement, and RFI. There's really deep, sort of thoughtful information gathering, and I think that that's going to feed into the ability to make thoughtful and considered policies.
So I hear what you're saying, that there's thoughtful information gathering going on right now, but I'm curious, where does this go? It seems like just broadly, not even in crypto ETFs, but you have all these sort of Franken funds being launched when you think about all the different iterations of 2 times leverage long, 2 times leverage inverse. It's even crazier in Europe. But specifically talking about the U.S. market, do you worry at all about, some of these retail traders getting involved with extremely leveraged products on extremely volatile tokens, which in many cases aren't really connected to any sort of fundamentals?
So I think that it's something that you always need to be careful with. I personally, in terms of my trading philosophy, I think I shy away from leverage on such a volatile asset class. I think there's enough volatility without adding that component of complexity or risk to it. But I think that different investors have different appetites, and some of them are sophisticated enough to feel comfortable engaging with those types of products.
So
it
sounds like you don't engage with those products, but you're okay with other people engaging in them. Like, you're not concerned about, I'm not going to say meltdown, but some sort of issue if we do see even more volatility to the downside, perhaps, and people end up losing quite a bit with leveraged products.
So I'm personally of the philosophy that in crypto markets, we see that kind of leverage and then some in the offshore markets, the offshore derivative markets. And it's been, sort of a backbone and a key component of crypto markets for years, sort of since the outset. And I think that will continue, and whether it's accessed onshore via ETF products that are leveraged, or whether it's offshore in sort of a less transparent form, often with auto liquidation and margining, I think that to some extent you could argue that it's safer to have these things onshore and regulated. And I think that's a big goal of what at least I'm hoping for from the SEC, is sort of guidance, transparency, regulation that makes sense, that helps guide retail investors in the US and protects them.
Well, with all this talk of volatility, let's talk about something that doesn't move. And I'm talking about stable coins. It's interesting. You think about where sort of what we're seeing in the crypto space bleeds into what we're seeing in traditional finance, TradFi, if you will. And it feels like stable coins are increasingly that linkage point.
Yeah, I think that has been anyone who's coming from crypto. It's been clear for years that stablecoin is sort of a killer app, or the first killer app. I think the ability to near instantly settle cross-border flows or direct peer-to-peer payments is, once you've started using it, it's difficult to go back to, to Fed cutoffs and overnight waits. And I think that what we're starting to see is what can happen when stablecoin sort of breaks out of just the crypto universe and has a regulatory framework to thrive in. It's a tool, and I think we're going to see more crossover between DeFi and TradFi, and I think it's accretive to both sides of the fence.
All the FIs blending together. Blue, it's great to get some time with you. That is T.Rowe Price, head of digital asset strategy, Blue Macellari. Meanwhile, let's get a check on traditional markets, TradFi, because the S&P 500, as we've been mentioning, has been spiking. That's after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a closed-door JP Morgan event that the current trade situation with China unsustainable. He sees de-escalation happening soon, though he did say that negotiations haven't started yet. But again, Tim, you are seeing the reaction in markets pretty strongly right now. Yeah,
the S&P 500 right now up 2.7%, just off of the best levels of the day. The Dow Jones up 2.7%. The NASDAQ 100 up a whopping 3%. If you look at the NASDAQ or at the S&P 500, you've got 495 stocks higher right now and only 7 lower.
Some pretty incredible breadth. Of course, we'll see how that changes as we get Tesla earnings. But this is all about crypto, this show.
It is. And yesterday, Paul Atkins was sworn in as the chair of the SEC. He actually says that he's ready. That coming up next on Bloomberg Crypto. Solana climbing with the rest of digital assets this Tuesday. Joining us now to talk about Solana and other altcoins is Sol Strategies President and CEO Leah Wald. Leah, good to see you. 6% to the upside right now for Solana. We spent a good portion of our program talking about Bitcoin and the way it's decoupled from risk assets. People talking about it maybe being, okay, this actually is a safe haven now. That's what we've learned over the last month. With that said, what is the point of Sol in your view?
Great question. And Tim, thanks so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. That's a really interesting question. And it's, I think, broken down to 2 points. First, are we still seeing a correlation to the S&P? And second, what's the purpose and the importance of buying, investing, or speculating on Sol? So it is great to note that Bitcoin is trading above 90,000 this morning, which is nearly 4% over the past 24 hours, marking the highest level since early March. We think that this surge is driven by a combination of factors. Weakening U.S. dollar following President Trump's criticism of Jerome Powell, calls for immediate interest rate hikes, and institutional inflows into the spot Bitcoin ETFs, which were enormous yesterday. So generally, we've seen a correlation with Bitcoin and other alternative currencies with the S&P 500, but recent movements do suggest potential short-term decoupling. So what does that mean for investors, right? And I think that's the big question. You are seeing an overall long-term correlation. So I think we are still seeing that interest in participating in the cryptocurrency markets and Sol as an interesting investment in this time of definite political uncertainty.
Right. Well, Leah, I want to talk about what's the pitch for Sol and Solana relative to Bitcoin, because for a lot of folks who aren't necessarily knee deep in crypto, they could look at Bitcoin and say, that's enough for me. I've got my crypto risk allocation filled up. But how do you convince folks to diversify away from the OG?
It definitely is the OG. And I think what's been fantastic to see being in the industry for so long is that we do believe that Bitcoin has solidified its place as a potential store of value asset. And you've seen all the top asset managers in the world, especially in the United States, speak to it in that manner. That's how we've promoted it within an ETF as we speak to registered investment advisors. Now, cryptocurrencies and others such as Solana do behave differently. They definitely are a leveraged bet over what we see as an investment thesis for Bitcoin. So I do think that a lot of investors are interested in Sol if they want to have additional alpha on top of what they see as maybe the more safe haven, if you will, of cryptocurrencies being Bitcoin.
All right, Leah, great to get some time with you. Unfortunately, we're up against the clock. That is Sol Strategies President and CEO Leah Wald. Quick check on the S&P 500 right now in TradFi land. The S&P 500 now up nearly 2.9%. You can see that big tech is leading the bulk of those gains, with the NASDAQ 100 3% higher after Scott Bessent hinted in a closed-door JP Morgan event that maybe some de-escalation with China could be coming soon, Tim.
The devil's in the details, though. De-escalation, so what does that look like? We know what the president says about tariffs. We know how he thinks China has treated the U.S. So what does de-escalation look like? That's the big question.
Hopefully we find out soon.
Well, that is going to do it for Bloomberg Crypto. Join us again next week, and thank you to Katie Greifeld for stepping in this week. This is Bloomberg.